Hey everyone, this is Kevin from thechesswebsite.com, and today we're going to be going over one of my favorite gambits. This Locock Gambit. It derives from the Philidor Defense, which is pawn e4, pawn e5, knight to f3. One of my more common openings I like to play, and then pawn d6 from black. This is the Philidor Defense. It's extremely passive. I don't like playing against it too much, so I try to find ways to play some spicy gambits to catch my opponent off guard. The main line is to continue with pawn to d4. They could always capture here, but one of the more common moves is knight to f6. And from here, I like to move knight to g5. Black can continue with bishop to e7, or many times I'm seeing pawn to h6, forcing the knight to move because they don't expect the knight to come up here in gambit with the Locock Gambit of knight takes f7. This is forking the queen and the rook. Pretty much the king is going to be taking here. If they want to give you a queen or rook for free, hey, that's completely fine. But more than likely, they're going to be taking with their king here on f7. Now, once they do that, then pawn to e5 is going to be the play. Now, they can't just take with their pawn. The queen is going to fall. So that is not an option here. So after the pawn takes on e5, a lot of ways that black can continue. And that's what we're going to be looking at today in our video. Now, the most common line from black is to play knight to d7. You can already see that the board is wide open for white to attack here, but the knight comes back since it was under attack and is now attacking this pawn here on e5. The move from here is going to be bishop to c4. When you have an opponent's king and it's out in the middle for you to attack, you have to engage as many pieces as possible to really give yourself the strongest attack. There's a few options that they have here. One of them would be pawn to d5. Now, it could be tempting to go ahead and take with your bishop here on d5. I'm going to say that's not the best move. What really is the best move is pawn to e6. Now, this looks like, oh, well, they just go ahead and take that pawn here, but they really can't. If the king takes here, then the queen's going to come up here, and it is going to be checkmates. Don't have too many moves here. King to f6, and then this is going to be mates. If they don't do that, let's say after pawn to e6, they just come back to g8. Okay, well, that's fine. We can go ahead and gobble up that knight here, and now there's going to be a discovered attack. If they want to go ahead and take with their pawn right here, then queen up here, d5. This is check as well. Maybe king to h7, queen to f5, check. You can see things are not going well at all. Pawn g6, trying to stop it. And this is a spicy move here. Pawn up here taking on a c8. So capturing your bishop, you have two queens on board. They pretty much have to take this queen here. And as soon as they take, the queen can come up and capture. White's going to be in a dominant position. Now, if we come back and after the move pawn e6, if they play king to e7, another logical line that they have here, then we're going to play pawn takes on d7, same as before. Let's say they take with their queen. Go ahead and take with your pawn. This is going to be completely fine. You can get your queen involved into the game if you want to. You can castle on the king side. Knight to c3. You can. The king is just ready to be attacked. So this is going to be a very good variation. Now if we come back, instead of the pawn coming here to d5, because we already saw that probably not the best move. The best move for them would actually be king to g6. But it looks extremely scary as far as why would you just bring your king here even more out into the open? But this would be the best move. From here, pawn e6, as we talked about before. They're usually going to be moving their knight a couple places. One, knight to b6, attacking the bishop here. Just bring your bishop back to b3. You have a really solid structure. This still defends the pawn here on e6. Very easy to now get the queen involved into the game if you want to get your knight involved. You could eventually castle on the queen side. More than likely, you will castle on the king side. If instead they play knight down here to e5, still attacking the bishop, still going to recommend bringing the bishop back here to b3, but now you have more options. Later on, pawn to f4, really throwing everything at the king side and attacking the knight, and then you can castle on the king side as well. But since king to g6 just does not look that easy, another option would be king to e7. Now white's going to take the pawn here on d6. Generally, if you can take material and put your opponent in check, opening up the board state when the king's in the middle, that's going to be very good. Now, black does need to take with his pawn. If he doesn't, it's going to be checkmate. So a couple variations, maybe king to h or to e8, just trying to get the king back, but this is going to fail. Queen to h5, check. You can see that there's just no defense for this king right here. Pawn to g6, sure, that just doesn't do much at all. This is going to be checkmate. If instead of king to e8, they try king to f6, still going to be a victory for white. Queen to f3, check, and then queen up here, and at the end of the day, this is going to be a checkmate. You'd have queen to e6, and this is going to be checkmate. Now, if we come back and say the pawn actually does capture here on d6 as it needs to, then knight to c3. And the reason this is good, white just has so many options. If we look at black's standpoint, you can already see the king's out in the middle. The dark square bishop, it can't go anywhere. Light square bishop can't go anywhere. The knight here on b8 can really only come to c6. That's not going to be all that helpful. Knight here to d5, that's going to be check. Can easily get the other bishop involved into the game. The queen has full control of the d file and this light square diagonal, so it doesn't matter where black goes. He has limited options, can easily be put into check. And then also the pawns can start pushing forward here for white and even put more pressure on black. So all this is going to be extremely good for white. Black's going to have a very difficult time. If we come back, instead of the king going to e7, could come back here to e8, but we already saw a glimpse of this before. Queen to h5, check. Maybe pawn to g6. Queen up here takes. King to e7, and then queen to f7, and this is going to be checkmate. So that is what happens with the most popular line of knight to d7. Not really fun for black to play, but the next one's going to be the knight takes here on e4, just as I'll try to gobble up material. The best move is queen to f3. This is putting their opponent into check, threatening the knight here on f3. Couple options. If he just wants to play knight to f6, says, I know I'm going to lose my knight, so I'm going to go ahead and do this. That's fine. Pawn takes here on f6. Maybe the queen takes. In this case, bishop to c4. Remember, king's out in the board. You need to get more material involved into the game. Don't try to do tricky and just trade off. You don't want to trade down at all. You gave up material so that you can have a strong attack. So don't trade off queens here. Put constant pressure on your opponents. Maybe queen to e2 here. If they eventually want to do something, decline. Bishop to e3. And then this has a discovered attack. So they have to always keep in mind that if their king is on a dark square, the bishop can always go there, and then there is going to be a discovered attack with the queen. You can always castle on the king side. You can get your knight here to c3, start to attack castle on the queen side, so a lot of different options. If they don't play knight to f6, some people don't like to bring their knight if it's under attack. They could play king to g8, thinking it's going to a safe square. Just go ahead and take the material here on e4. Same thing if they play king to g6, which many times is a good move. In this case, it's absolutely not a good move because after the queen takes, it's putting their opponent into check. Exactly what you want to do. And even worse mistake would be bishop here to f5, making it seem like, okay, yeah, I want to attack, save my king here, but pretty much they're just giving up material here on b7. Now, they could play knight to d7 because the rook would just fall here on a8, but then white has the great move of pawn to g4. A lot of different threats this has. If the bishop takes, the rook can swing over here to g1. That's going to pin down the bishop. You could even see something like pawn to h5, but then pawn to e3 from white, and the bishop would fall just because it is being pinned down from the rook. You can also see this dark square bishop putting a lot of pressure on the opponent. You can always swing the queen back as well. Just no real way for black to defend against this correctly. Another variation that you could see is knight to e8. And this is exactly where you want your opponent to be headed, getting all his pieces back on the 8th rank. If you see this, bishop to c4, we've talked about this before, getting more material involved into the game. One option could be king to g6. If you see this, I recommend pawn to f4, staying extremely aggressive. Another option, if they play bishop to e6, this is going to be extremely good for white because you just play queen to h5, check, and then after pawn to g6, then the bishop takes, check, and once the king takes, then you could take this pawn here on g6, check, queen here to f5, check, and you can see after pawn to e6, just a very good board state from white. Can easily swing over here to a d5, can get the knight involved into the game. Definitely not where black wants to be. The last option that you may see is the pawn take here on e5. Now, many players, if they haven't played this variation, don't do this because they recognize that the queen is going to take here on d8. They actually do have a move, and that is bishop to b4, check, because the rook can now take here on d8 after the check. So it's a discovered attack. So because of this, knowing that the queen is going to fall, the best move is to bring the queen back here to d2. The bishop has to take, can't be down a queen. So after the bishop takes, you want to take with your knight. The reason is you want to hold on to this material here on e4. So white is up material, has a better board state, and so all in all, this is still going to be a very, very good game from white. So that's the Locock Gambit. Hopefully you guys enjoy this video, one of my favorite gambits, and definitely like to punish someone for playing a very passive defense. This has so many tricky lines if someone has not played it as black, and it's a lot of fun just to chase your opponent's king around. So leave a comment. Let me know what you guys think. If you have other videos you want me to make, feel free to send me an email. Let me know. Always looking for suggestions. But until next time, thanks again for watching. I'll see you guys then.